Hello and welcome back to the Three-Handed Bandits channel. It's Nathan back with another video for you today. And today we're going to be unveiling the Atlanta Falcons, kind of a little bit teaser for our power rankings dropping Tuesday. Now normally I would go through every single team, but I had a busy summer, was not able to. So maybe giving you a little bit of a precursor before the full power rankings drop Tuesday. And I'm starting revealing today number 25, the Atlanta Falcons. I know this is going to piss some people off, but I think this team is horribly, horribly overrated. Now, before we get into all of that, though, please go ahead and like and subscribe, or if you're a Falcons fan, probably go ahead and dislike this video because you're not going to like what I'm going to say. But let's get straight into it. Look, I am just not a fan of what this team did this offseason. I frankly think that their offseason is horribly overrated, and they've consistently stacked poor offseason on top of poor offseason on top of poor offseason in the Terry Fontenot era. And I think this team's roster is struggling because of that. And now this screams of desperation as they spent $180 million on Kirk Cousins, spent a first-round pick on Michael Penix, and fire head coach and bring in Raheem Morris. Like, overall, it just feels like they're doing everything they can to try to be a decent team, and I just don't think they're doing the actual right things that they need to be doing. So let's just go ahead and get into this offseason. Like, as I said, though, I don't think it was the right call. We'll talk about the offensive side first. Obviously, the big key addition is going to be Kirk Cousins. I just don't understand giving $180 million to a 36-year-old quarterback coming off a torn, ruptured Achilles who's never been elite in his career. I don't understand the thought process. You saw what happened when Matt Ryan left the Falcons and went to the Colts and things went horribly wrong. This is just giving so many shades of that Matt Ryan situation. And we'll talk more about Kirk in just a little bit. But even the rest of this team's offseason, they go the defensive-minded head coach in Raheem Morris. We'll talk about more in just a second. So that means they're promoting Zach Robinson to be their offensive coordinator, who's going to be a first-time play caller. I just don't know how that's going to work out. They spend a first-round pick on Michael Penix, who's already older, and they're going to have him sit and develop behind Kirk Cousins, or maybe not, depending on how Kirk actually ends up playing. I mean, I think it's okay if you spend the first-round pick on him, but a top 10 pick couldn't have traded or tried to plug any other holes that you had on this team. This is a luxury pick for a team that should not be taking luxury picks. Like, they just do not have the roster talent to just spend a first-round pick on someone who's not going to play for them. This isn't the caliber of prospect that Jordan Love was. You're taking him 8th overall instead of the end of the first round. You had Aaron Rodgers in place when you took Jordan Love. You're bringing in a quarterback to then draft his replacement, neither of which are as good at that situation. Like, to me, it's just mind-boggling what this front office has done and how poorly Terry Fontenot has truly drafted in his time. Like, look at the last couple of drafts the Falcons have had and tell me what the fuck they've been doing. It's been absolutely horrible. It's been abysmal. And I think there's just a horrible waste of a first-round pick. Bringing Jason McClellan is going to be a rotational running back, maybe. You won't see much of him. I don't think the Darnell Mooney signing was bad. Bringing a wide receiver, too, who should theoretically be better than Matt Collins and Scotty Miller, Van Jefferson, kind of some of the other guys they had. But he really hasn't done much the last couple of years, so we'll see if we can kind of get that good wide receiver back out of Darnell Mooney. Casey Washington, a late-round pick. And then they bring in 2 tight ends over from San Francisco. In case you were wondering what type of scheme Zach Robinson's going to run, well, there's your clue. However, when it comes to who they lost, luckily I do think that they let go of the right pieces. First of all, getting rid of the absolute aura vacuum that is Arthur Smith. I think he's an underrated offensive mind, or at least he is a good offensive coordinator, but clearly could not handle the head coaching responsibilities, whether it's how he dealt with media, his overall leadership as, the coach and the figurehead of the team. Clearly that struggled. I can kind of see him settling in and being a solid plus offensive coordinator for another team at some point, like he already has in Pittsburgh, but I don't really see him ever being head coach again. But you clearly needed to move on. It just was not working here in Atlanta. They also lose Dave Ragoni, the offensive coordinator, who was just Arthur Smith's sidekick. They lose Desmond Ridder, who I think I might be a better quarterback than. Cordarrelle Patterson was great a couple years ago, but last year really had no relevance since Bajan got there. Johnny Smith and McCole Pruitt, two of Arthur Smith's boys, just kind of rotational tight ends, are both out the door. And then a handful of wide receivers that really did not do much. So I think at least at the minimum, they should have raised their floor. But I mean, there's still really a potential for this offense to look really, really horrible if things don't go right. Granted, you also actually have a much better upside than what you were getting in Arthur Smith. So, I mean, at least that is a positive. But there's still some warts or still potential worries for this offense. Defensively speaking, though, there is a good amount of continuity. They do bring in Raheem Morris to be their head coach. I don't get why. Look, here's the entire thing I'm going to go about this team. First of all, why are you going to get a defensive mind? You saw what happened when you brought in Dan Quinn. It kind of flamed out. Like, if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to make the same mistakes. You're going to repeat the same mistakes, and I feel like we're going to do that. So first of all, why are you going to go get a defensive mind? Like, why get him? Like, first of all, go offensive mind. You saw what happened. You had Kyle Shanahan. You don't even have to, not even 10 years ago, Kyle Shanahan was here as the OC and left because he had a defensive mind, and look what happened to the Falcons team. So why are we trying to go then the defensive route? Obviously, Arthur Smith didn't work, and I guess that scared you. But you saw what happened on the defensive side. Like, I don't think it was great either. And you're not even getting, like, a super elite defensive mind. Like, if you're going to go the defensive route and get a defensive head coach, why not try to go get Bill Belichick, who's someone who can actually be an elite defensive mind, especially with some of the secondary talent that this team has now. Like, you could have had a really great defense. So first of all, you should have gone offense, because you saw what happened with the Dan Quinn and Kyle Shanahan thing. But now if you are going to go defense, like, why not even go take a better guy? And I don't want to discredit Raheem Morris. Like, he is qualified to be a, coach. I just don't think that he's like a true game-changing X's and O's scheme guy. I do think he'll be a great leader and a much better leader than Arthur Smith. And maybe he's just kind of here to kind of redevelop and fix the culture, kind of how the Texans did with, what's his face, David Cullen and then Lovie Smith. So maybe that's the goal. But like long-term upside, I don't think Raheem Morris is going to be some like elite head coach that rivals like a DeMeco Ryans, a Kyle Shanahan, a McVay, and Andy Reid. So I don't think that was the right hire. And even go back to the Kirk Cousins things. Before last season, they could have traded for Lamar, but now you're going to spend $180 million on Kirk. So you'd rather pay 36-year-old quarterback coming off a torn Achilles $45 million a year instead of pay Lamar Jackson $55 million. Asinine, complete utter failure from Terry Fontenot. He needs to go. He's actively hurting this team, and I don't see enough people calling for his head and his job because he's been absolutely horrible for this team. However, I digress. Looking at the other additions to this team, Jimmy Lake, who's been Raheem Morris's sidekick as defensive coordinator, Rook Aurora, that guy, second-round pick. Could have had Johnny Newton, Jazir Newton, but instead you go for this guy who like is 23 and still raw and hasn't been developing like he should have. Braylon Trice could have been an okay third-round pick, but he's going to be done for the year, so we'll see how he goes. They do trade for Matt Judon. I think he might be closer to a name than a player. Like, I mean, he'd still be good, but I don't think this is going to be the impact that people are giving it the credit for. Antonio Hamilton, an older guy who will come in and be good corner depth, and then Justin Simmons at least is going to give you, one of, if not the best safety duos in the league. So overall, like, at least I think, I don't think this was a great defensive offseason. At least you have a coach that will be a better leader, but talent-wise, I'm not sure how I feel. Because I don't get it. Because you had Ryan Nielsen here. You already had a good defensive coordinator in place. Just go the offensive route. Like, it just doesn't make sense. So they lose Ryan Nielsen, who did a really good job with his defense last year. They lose Albert Huggins, not very good. Calais Campbell was still a really great run defender. Bud Dupree, just like a okay edge rusher at this point in his career. Okuda just never quite worked out, and then they lose DeMarco Helms. He's going to be on IR to start the year, but he can return at some point. So overall, offseason, I think they just consistently have been stacking the wrong move upon the wrong move upon the wrong move. I think they've done that for years now, and I don't think they really did much to correct that. You already had a good DC in place. They could have gotten an offensive mind to pair with a rookie quarterback, someone who we think can actually be the long-term head coach of this team. So I just think it is just a horrible offseason. I think they did not everything wrong, but I think they took the wrong steps. Very misguided, incorrect steps. I can understand why or kind of the thought process of what they did, but to me it's also like you were trying to copy someone's homework and change it up a little bit and you don't fully understand what you're doing is kind of what I'm getting from there. So I think this offseason is not the right steps they needed to take to progress this team to be a Super Bowl championship contender. Maybe you can win your, one of the weakest divisions in football, and maybe you can squeak in a playoff game, but I don't really see that happening. All right, and now we'll go ahead and just briefly talk about this coaching scheme. So obviously Raheem Morris is going to be the guy. He's going to be the OC. It's going to be his defense. He's been all over the place. He was there with the John Gruden Tampa 2 teams. Then he was there for the Seattle kind of cover 3 that Dan Quinn was running. And then he spent the last couple of years with Brandon Staley and Vic Fangio. I do kind of expect they're going to keep running that scheme. I think he's kind of grown to love it. They do run a lot more cover 3, or they have for the Rams. So at least I think they'll actually switch up coverages and not be so one note. But I don't think he's going to have some crazy new groundbreaking scheme or anything like that. And then obviously Jimmy Lake is just going to do what Raheem Morris wants. Zach Robin is coming from McVay, who's traditionally more 11 personnel, likes 3 wide receivers, as opposed to Shanahan, who likes to go 12 and a little bit bigger. 12 personnel, a little bit bigger packages, but he brings 2 of the San Francisco tight ends over. So maybe he might go more of a Shanahan type of wide zone as opposed to a McVay type of wide zone. But I'm going to be honest, this is just not a scheme I'm really that high on. I think this scheme does a good job of elevating poor talent. But as you see, like how the Chiefs have been, how the Bengals have been, even like McVay and Shanahan are kind of pivoting away from just straight wide zone. I think to be an elite team, to win Super Bowls, to actually like be a great team, I think you need to have a different scheme where you actually need your players making plays. I think this wide zone scheme, this scheme is making the plays, and so when things break down, the lesser players that are elevated aren't able to make the plays necessary. So this is a scheme I'm lower on. I get why teams run it. You're hoping you can get your next LaFleur, Shane, or I guess Steichen something else. So your McDaniel, your Bobby Slowick, your next kind of elite rising ascending mind is you're hoping you're getting one of these guys. Even if you don't, you'll at least have solid offensive play. But I think just long-term upside to be an elite team, I don't really want the wide zone scheme unless you do have the Shanahan or the McVay. And he's a first-time play caller, so who knows if he's going to be even able to call the right plays or handle a game script or like what's going to happen. We'll have to see. I think it's a worthy shot. But I'd rather go the offensive mind route and keep Nielsen. I think that would be a long-term or even short-term would have been a much better route to go. But I mean, Zach Robinson, Raheem Morris, they deserve to have a shot taken on them. I just don't know if that was the right team or the right situation for the Falcons to be doing this, especially pairing them together. But now we'll go ahead and break down the roster, starting off with Captain Kirk. And look, I like Kirk Cousins. I do think he has gotten much better and has been like a fringe top 10 quarterback, but he is 36 years old coming off a torn, ruptured Achilles. And look, he's never actually been like an elite quarterback. So expecting a 36-year-old quarterback coming off a serious Achilles injury, moving teams to come in and give you top 10 quarterback play, I think you are setting yourself up for disaster, especially when you pair in, the rest of your offseason coaching. Like, you are truly setting yourself up for disaster. And an Achilles is not an easy injury to come up or return from. If you look at the NBA, like Boogie Cousins, someone had the same last name, tore his Achilles, went from averaging 25 points a game to 16 points a game to under 10 to out of the league. Rudy Gay was averaging damn near 20, and then after his Achilles started averaging around 10. If you look at even like some other guys, like Cam Akers tore his Achilles, now he's the RB4 in the Texans. Marlon Mack, who? James Robinson, who? J.K. Dobbins hasn't been the same, and even Tariq Cohen has never been able to get back into the league. So just when you see and pair all these guys who have not been able to recover, expecting a 36-year-old quarterback to do it, as I said, a guy who's also never been elite to do it, just to me doesn't make sense. Like, even Kobe, like 3 years later, was done and retired. Granted, his job is maybe not as physically dependent on it, like, a running back or an NBA player, but you still need to be mobile. You still need to be flexible. You still need to be able to plant off the ground. And as a guy who's already been one of the least mobile, if not the least mobile quarterback, making that even worse, I feel like we're just setting ourselves up for failure here. So as I said, like it's very Matt Ryan-esque when he was on the Colts. Like, this is the situation where I'm getting, where you bring in an aging quarterback, think you're going to have solid play, and then shit just really hits the fan. So I just think it's really, really set up for disaster. At least on the bright side, he's become a much better processor, and his pocket presence has gotten better at least, but how's it going to be when you're not able to move around as much? But, like, is he going to be worth damn near $200 million? I don't think so. But as I said, I just don't understand spending this money on a guy who, first of all, is 1-4 in the playoffs. He's like 16-47 against teams with winning records. Like, I think he's a good quarterback, but I don't think he's a great one. He's not elevating teams. He's not getting you to a Super Bowl. Like, can we really expect Kirk Cousins, who had Justin Jefferson and Kevin O'Connell, and they still lost to the Daniel Jones Giants? Are we expecting them to go into Green Bay, go into Detroit, go against Dallas, Philly, the Niners, the Rams? Are we expecting him to go beat any of them at home or on the road? No, we're not. So I don't understand what we're doing unless we really just want to try to win one game. But I think it's going to be like the Saints last year, where they had a bunch of hype and just weren't as good as people were expecting. Because frankly, like, he's good, not great. He's in the true, third tier of quarterbacks, of not really elite, not bad, just a capable starter. That's what he is. And that's if he comes back and plays at the same level. He could really, the wheels could fall off and it could be even worse. So I don't think this was the right decision. I think I got Michael Penix in. I don't know what his upside is. He does have a cannon arm, but, we'll see how he's actually able to develop and learn. And, I think at some point, I think there's a good chance that Michael Penix is going to start multiple games, or at least a game, for the Falcons this year. But I just don't know, drafting an older quarterback with an 8th overall pick, doesn't make sense. I don't think it was the right move. And now when we talk at least about some of the talent on this team, like the playmakers, another group I just don't think is very good. Listen, Drake London, I'm staying away from in fantasy. I know he's getting all the hype. People are expecting him to, really break out because, you saw how Kirk did with Justin Jefferson, and, he had Desmond Ridder throwing the ball. He's got to be better. No, he's not. He's not going to be better. You know why why Kirk kept throwing to Justin Jefferson? Because he's Justin fucking Jefferson. He's a elite player on track to be a Hall of Famer. Drake London is not that. He's a good wide receiver, but I think he's kind of in the Cortland Sutton mold of just a good wide receiver. Look what happened when Russ first went to Denver. Everybody was hyping them up. It's not always the quarterback. Sometimes the wide receiver just has limited upside. Like, if you look at it, Drake London does not have nearly the same verticality or speed aspect of his game like Jefferson. Or even, like, as I said, Yak. Drake London is a slow wide receiver. He can only create so much separation, and he can only do so much with the ball afterwards. In his career, he is less yards after the catch than Justin Jefferson did the year before last, when he had 1,800 yards. So he had less in his career than Justin Jefferson had in 1 year. So no, Drake London is not nearly going to produce the same level that Justin Jefferson is. So why you're spending a second-round pick on him in fantasy football doesn't make sense to me. I think best case you're hoping that he's going to be like a Michael Thomas and get a bunch of short and intermediate targets, and average depth of target be like 9 yards. I think is what you're hoping for fantasy, and he has like 10 catches a game. Don't think it's going to happen. I think this team's going to try to run the ball a lot more. So I don't think it's happening. Don't think he's worth the pick. I think if you draft him in fantasy, you're going to regret it, and I think he's just being overvalued. Don't get me wrong. He is still a good wide receiver, but he's not elite. He's not some star. I don't think he's going to suddenly break out and become like this great wide receiver. I do think his athleticism is limiting him in that aspect. And look, he has not had a touchdown over 20 yards. Kirk Cousins, his red zone efficiency has really struggled. I think last year I saw a stat that said it was his least efficient year in the red zone since 2016. So you have a guy who can only score touchdowns in the red zone paired with a quarterback who is inefficient in the red zone. Recipe for disaster. Do we see what we're doing? We're pairing all these different logs that are just setting ourselves up for failure, and no one is looking at those. Red flag, red flag, red flag, and we're all ignoring them. Darnell Mooney on the bright side, I think is due for a reemergence. He's been there with Justin Fields, who's a guy who can't get to his second read, and Darnell Mooney is consistently the second read. When you pair those together, what's going to happen? You're going to get left out to dry. So I think Kirk Cousins, who's actually been able to go through his reads and run an actual offense, I think Darnell Mooney is bound to break out. But Ray McCloud is your freaking slot wide receiver and your wide receiver 3. That's bad. That dude is a punt returner, kick returner at best, and now he's your starting slot. Do not like it. Kareem Hodge is a big body outside guy who maybe can come in and be a good player for you. And then Casey Washington, a 6th-round pick. We'll see what you get from him. So really, you got Drake London, maybe Darnell Mooney breaks out, and no other wide receivers that I really, really want on the field. And then we got Kyle Pitts, who just frankly has not been as good as advertised. Look, he's not a tight end, right? He's just this big freak flex tight end. Wide receiver, slot wide receiver almost. So I don't want to put him down line. Part of the reason that Kittle and some of these, Cooper Kupp have been so effective in this wide zone scheme is because they are great blockers. Kyle Pitts is not a great blocker, so the threat of him leaking out is not quite the same as it has been for some of those other guys. Now, I do think having a quarterback who can more consistently target him deep and hit some of those deep throws, I do think will help him. But I don't necessarily think that he's going to finally break out and be the guy that everyone's kind of been expecting for him to be. Because, even like him, he does have more of a deep threat and a verticality element that Drake London doesn't. But I still think his best utilization is going to be closer to the red zone and being more of a receiving threat and mismatch problem down there. I just don't know if we're going to see that end up happening. So Drake London and Kyle Pitts are both guys I'm staying away from. The other tight ends they got here, Charlie Warner and Ross Dwelley, mainly just blocking types who might have a touchdown or two on the season, but I'm not expecting much from them. They're not taking Kyle Pitts' role. They're really just there to block. But seeing that and the wide receivers they have, I do expect this team to be a lot more 12 personnel and be more of a Shanahan-style wide zone than like the McVay-style wide zone. And then running back depth, Bijan Robinson is just elite. He can catch the ball. He can run routes. He does have some hands inconsistency every now and then, but I think in his second year is something that's just going to grow and not be an issue. But Tyler Algier is not getting the respect he deserves. Don't get me wrong, not a great athlete and not some star running back, but still a good running back that does everything at a great level. Pass blocks, has good vision, runs hard. So I don't want to draft Bijan Robinson in the first round, or at least as high as he's going, because I don't think he's just going to come in this year and just randomly get all the touches. Like, I do think that Tyler Algier is too good to not have a consistent workload. So I don't think his production is going to be as high as people are expecting. He may be due for some more touchdowns and still be better, in fantasy, and might have 12 or 1,300 yards as opposed to just barely 1,000. But I don't truly expect some like RB1. Like, I don't think his production will necessarily match his skill level per se. But he does everything at an elite level and is close to Christian McCaffrey, at least probably the closest running back to Christian McCaffrey currently in the league. So overall, I do think the passing upside of this offense is more limited than people are giving it credit for. And even then, like the floor, this team could really bottom out passing wise. It could really, really be a struggle if things don't go their way. And then we'll briefly talk about the running backs as runners. Very similar to what I said about them as receivers. Bijan Robinson's elite, great vision, great shiftiness. Not like elite speed, but still great speed, and just does everything right. I think he had a couple fumbles, but as I said, I think that's also something he'll clean up. But as I said, Tyler Algier also not getting the credit he deserves. A very good running back. I think he still has a role in this offense. I think it'll be closer to probably like I'll say 35-65. But I still think he's going to have his role, going to have his touches. Like there's still value in a hard downhill rushing running back, and I think he's too good to just lose all of his work to Bijan Robinson. And then the other two guys, I'm not expecting anything from them unless there happens to be an injury. And even if there is an injury, I'm still not really expecting much from them regardless. And now as we talk about this offensive line, I think we're still setting ourselves up for disaster. Because look, this offensive line, pretty good run blocking unit, especially in this wide zone scheme. But pass blocking, they're not great. So pair a not great pass blocking offensive line with Kirk Cousins, who's not mobile and coming off an Achilles injury, you see where things can start becoming an issue. Especially as, outside of Storm Norton, they have no good depth. Something else they benefited with last year was the health of this offensive line. Jake Matthews and Matthew Bergeron played all 17 games for them. Chris Lindstrom only missed one game, and then Drew Dahlman and Caleb McGarry missed 3 games each. So you barely had any injuries last year. Between all 5 starters, they missed a total of 7 games. That's really good and not always sustainable. So we need an offensive line this year, pair with a new OC who's never called plays, a quarterback who's not mobile, who's 36 years old, coming off an injury, and then receiving talent who's not as good as expected, or may not be as good as expected. An offense that could start losing pieces on the O-line, that won't have the depth, and even as they are not great pass protectors as a unit. Do we see where things could potentially go wrong here? Like, don't get me wrong, Jake Matthews, probably the best pass protector, very solid, no issues with him. He's been a rock as long as he's been in the league. I don't expect any regression from him to, happen. He's not a great run blocker, but, that's not why you pay him. Matt Bergeron, second-round pick, had his lumps, had some okay reps last year. We'll see what you get from him. Drew Dahlman, undersized, cannot leave this dude one-on-one, but he's a great athlete, and he's basically what Garrett Bradbury's been in Minnesota. Uber athlete, undersized, but great for kind of the move blocking scheme with how agile he is. Chris Lindstrom, one of the best offensive linemen, one of the best guards in the league. Will have some losses in pass protection, but as a run blocker is up there as one of the best there is. And then Caleb McGarry is kind of the inverse of Jake Matthews, where he is a solid pass protector, not anything crazy, but a really good run blocker. So I think, if everyone's healthy and Matthew Bergeron takes a step, this could be a really good offensive line. If you get some injury regression, then I think we could be bad news bears. At least they have Storm Norton, who's now developed into a more capable kind of 6-swing tackle for him. Was great in the XFL when it first happened, then came over to the NFL and really struggled, but now has developed into a solid player and a good rotational piece. But an injury, 2 injuries, something happened with Chris Lindstrom, like the potential for this offense could be really, really bad. And, maybe I'm being too negative, maybe I'm being too cynical, and I'm just expecting a worst-case scenario, but, there is a true worst-case scenario, like we saw with the Colts with Matt Ryan, is you have an aging quarterback who can't play at the same level, especially coming off a really bad injury. You have receiving weapons that are not as good as advertised, and an offensive line that struggles and has some injuries. There is a recipe for this to be the worst offense in the NFL. I don't think people are giving enough credit to that, and I think this team is being overhyped. I just think all these red flags, pairing them together, at the end of the season, everyone's going to look back and be like, oh my God, why did we not see that? And to me, it's sticking out, and I have to call it out, and this is the reason why I do think they're going to struggle. Could this be a top 10 unit with a great offensive line? Kirk Cousins come back and plays great, and then Drake London and Kyle Pitts and Bijan take steps forward? Yes. I don't think that's going to happen. I think these guys have showed us what they are, and there's such a huge chance of regression where I think it weighs the potential upside of this offensive unit. And now, as we switch over to the defense, I'm not a huge fan of Raheem Morris's unit either. And we'll start on this D-line. God, it kind of sucks. At least they brought in Matt Judon, who at least give him some pass rushing upside. But, like, he's a star, I guess. He's not near elite. I think he's a low-end 1 at this point in his career, maybe a high-end 2. And he's going to have to be your number 1 guy. But I'm just like, I'm not scared of him. I don't think he's a Josh Hines Allen. I don't think he's even a Brian Burns per se. Definitely not a Crosby or a Bosa or a Watt or a Parsons or a Myles Garrett. So at least he'll be their best edge rusher by far, and at least we'll give them a adult in the building, per se. But he's also coming off a serious injury, so just expecting him to come in and still be that great version of himself, that's a lot to risk our entire defense on, because as I said, no one else on this D-line I'm scared of. You got James Smith-Williams, don't know much about him, but I don't think he's very good. D'Angelo Malone has been here for a couple of years and hasn't done a damn thing. And then you got Lorenzo Carter, great athlete, has yet to develop or actually do anything with that athleticism at a damn near 30. Not happening. At this point, it's not happening. So I think he was, 96 in pass rush win rate last year out of all eligible rushers? That's not good. Think about it. If there's 32 teams and there's 2 edge rushers, that means he's like a low-end 3. Yeesh, that's not good. Then you got Arnold Ebiketie. Not a great run defender, but at least has some more pass rushing upside than Lorenzo Carter. So maybe Lorenzo Carter, who is a decent run defender, will be your early down edge, and then Arnold Ebiketie can kind of come in on pass rush downs and maybe give you something. I know, he was 55th in pass rush win rate, so not expecting low end 2 from him. But even then, I don't really want him to be your number 2 pass rusher. Ideally, I'd want him to be your 3rd pass rushing option there. So this edge group is bad, and I think they're really going to struggle to get after the quarterback. Pair that with Raheem Morris, so I'm not sure how he's going to do, especially with the Fangio scheme. That's not always great about getting pressure. I do think that's going to ultimately hurt the secondary. And then in the interior, you got Onyemata, who's just a stud. A better run defender than is pass rusher, but is still adequate and pretty good on both phases. But, he's not scary. He's not a number 1. He's not a Barmore. He's not a Jonathan Allen. He's definitely not a Chris Jones, Quinnen Williams, any of the elite guys. But he's definitely not someone you have to worry about. But if he goes down, I'd be worried. Look, Grady Jarrett, he's been a good player. He's been a great player. But he's getting older. He's coming off an injury. He's already been slowing down. While he is an absolute fire hydrant at 6 foot 310 pounds or whatever he is, that helps him kind of be better than he really should be, especially with how strong he is. You can't move him. As I said, he's a fire hydrant. I don't really expect him to be as great as he's been, because I think that quickness is going to keep slowing down, especially coming off the knee injury. And then Zach Harrison is kind of this hybrid kind of role. Maybe he'll play a little bit more early down, edge, kind of help defend the run, and then kick inside to rush the passer. But I think he's going to be a better run defender than he is going to be getting after the quarterback. And then a handful of depth here. First of all, you got Rook Arororo, who is their 2nd-round pick, is currently listed behind a couple of people on the depth chart. Yeesh, not good. So maybe he can rotate in towards the end of the season, but, he's not really been a great pass rusher in college. I'd expect that to necessarily develop as he's, 23, 24. I don't really expect that to necessarily happen. Eddie Goldman was great on that Bears team a couple years ago, and then kind of flamed out of the league, and then kind of came back. So who knows what he's going to be. I'm not really expecting much from him. They also got Taquan Graham, who I think just might end up being a better version of Rook Aroro. So I think that's just, as I said, poor drafting team wasting a second-round pick when they have someone in-house who might just be better already. Cadavius Street is okay at getting after the quarterback, but not anything particular. And then Brandon Dorless, who's a hybrid, who's okay in both phases, getting after the quarterback or rushing, but fourth-round pick, you're not really expecting much. So, look, this defensive line, I think, has the potential to be good at best and could be pretty bad, especially getting after the quarterback, especially if Judon goes down or is not the same. Like, how are they going to get after the quarterback? Maybe Raheem Morris can do a good job drawing up stunts and stuff, like Dan Quinn, who he was under. Maybe picked up a lot from there. I don't expect it to happen. I just don't think this defensive line really has the talent, and I do think it's really going to rely on Raheem Morris to really get the best and make this unit overperform than the actual talent that they got. And then as we round out the front seven, we'll talk about the linebackers. We'll start with Caden Ellis. I don't really trust handsome linebackers. But he's overall just really solid in both phases, kind of in like that Josie Jewell type of linebackers who are kind of pretty good run defenders and only okay in coverage. He's not necessarily a liability, but he's not some elite game-changing coverage player. He kind of just does everything at a very solid level, and is overall just a very balanced, well-rounded linebacker. Troy Anderson, though, that dude looks like a linebacker. That's the linebacker who, when I see him, I want him to be my linebacker. That dude looks like a linebacker. Caden Ellis, too handsome. Troy Anderson, that dude's a linebacker. His only deficiency is he doesn't know what he's doing. Slight issue when you're playing in the NFL. He is a crazy athlete. It's just going to, depends on if he can kind of figure out the position and kind of learn how to be an NFL linebacker. But theoretically has all the physical tools to be a really good linebacker someday. But if he doesn't quite work out or ends up being a liability, they do got Nate Landman here, who's kind of in that like Robert Spillane role of kind of not super good athletes, but are very smart and understand the position well. So while he'll struggle in coverage, he's a good run defender. Plays really, really hard, but physically he's just limited sometimes. Like, it looks like he's got concrete on his cleats because sometimes he's just slower and just can't hang necessarily. But at least he'll give him solid play if Troy Anderson is a complete liability. But currently Anderson is listed as the starter, so maybe he will be a solid player for them. And as I said, has the physical upside to be a very great player. And now we are on the secondary. This unit probably has the most optimism, I guess. I don't know. We got 3 really good players and 3 question marks. We'll start on the safeties because, as I said, this is probably the best safety duo in the league. Jesse Bates is probably the best safety in the NFL. If not, he's 1, 2, or 3. Really good run defender, but also coverage-wise, absolutely locked down. Great ball skills, great ball production. And that's not even including the routes that he just completely eliminates the quarterback from being able to throw. 0 issues there. If he's healthy, he's going to be a great player. Justin Simmons is a very good safety as well. He just lacks some of the ball skills and ball production to be kind of elite like Jesse Bates. But you're not really worried about him per se. And then AJ Terrell is a good corner. Hasn't quite been that elite version of him that was in 2021, and frankly, at this point, not necessarily expecting it. You might even say he's trending down a little bit. He's definitely lost a handful of reps that he wasn't losing a couple years ago. But you're not necessarily worried about him. But if he goes down, you are worried about the rest of your corners. Mike Hughes is currently listed as a starter. He's been a good run defender, but really been poor in coverage. So I think that could be a liability for them. I do think at some point Clark Phillips will probably end up taking over. Smaller, undersized guy who's not a great athlete. Shades of Darius Williams. He's been there with the Rams and been a good corner. I think that's what you're kind of expecting, or at least hoping Clark Phillips to be. And you're hoping that he can take over the starting job. But he hasn't, so that makes me just a little bit worried. So I think that second cornerback spot is a glaring hole. And if something happens to A.J. Terrell, yeesh, you are going to be worried. Slot corner wise, though, you got D. Alford, undrafted guy who is undersized but is a really good athlete. So he will make some plays and is a good coverage player. But in run defense, you're not really expecting much from him. Or even just tackling in general, you're not really expecting much from him because he is undersized. But look at that face, dude. That looks like a starting corner in the NFL. He just looks like a corner. Look at the hair, the chain, everything. That looks like a corner. And I think he'll make some plays, and I think he'll have some games. But then there'll be some teams who I think will have some bigger slot wide receivers who I think can completely bully him. So I do think he'll make plays, but I think he could be matchup dependent. And if he ends up kind of underperforming and not living up, because he is an undrafted player after all, Antonio Hamilton can come in and at least give you solid slot corner play. But definitely D. Alford has much more upside. And then Richie Grant is going to be dime back, third safety. I think getting him off the field is only going to help. When DeMarco Hellams inevitably comes off of injury, I do think we'll end up seeing not a whole lot of Richie Grant, and we'll see a lot more DeMarco Hellams as more of a more traditional box safety, who I do think can hit pretty hard, but definitely can get beat in coverage as well. Richie Grant just sucks. He's just a liability in both aspects, and when he got benched, it made the team better. So he sucks. Second cornerback slot could suck as well. But if things go well, you'll have 4 really good players, and maybe Clark Phillips will be a 5th. And then, if your dime back is not that great, who cares? Depth-wise, though, if A.J. Terrell or Jesse Bates go down, then you're going to start getting really worried about this secondary. I do think the secondary does provide the most optimism for this team and for this defense. I think it's definitely their closest unit to being an elite unit, but there still is holes in a couple spots there. And so overall, looking at this defense, I'm worried that Raheem Morris isn't going to do enough things necessary to overcome some of the holes and lack of talent that they have. I do think this team is going to struggle to get after the quarterback, and I do think that's going to hurt the secondary in turn. Run defense, they won't quite be as good as last year. Losing Bud Dupree and Calais Campbell are both pretty good edge run defenders, is going to hurt. But I don't think this is going to be a bad run defense unit. I do think they'll do a good job. But when you're not able to get it for the quarterback, force turnovers, and really make them uncomfortable, I do think that's where you can really struggle and have bad defenses, especially when you pair that with the Fangio scheme, which is definitely kind of getting phased out of the league as teams have kind of figured out how to go against it. So looking at their schedule real quick, people are saying it's one of the easiest schedules in the league. I'm going to push back on that. I think it's pretty difficult. First of all, opening up against Pittsburgh, I really like this Pittsburgh defense. This is the type of game that Mike Tomlin wins every single year, and it's exactly how they always go, 500 or better. And so I do think that that's a game I think they're going to lose. I don't know what the exact odds are, but I'm taking Pittsburgh to win that game. You heard it here first. Then you have to go on the road to Philly and then play KC at home. Best case scenario, you get 1 win. I think you're probably 0-3. Then you got a handful of divisional games. Hopefully you can beat the Saints and the Buccaneers at home, but I have a lot of faith in Carolina. So I think that's going to be a hard road game. Seattle, I think you probably should beat, but it's no real guarantee. And then you have to go on the road to Tampa. So that's 3 hard games to open your schedule, and then you got to play 4 divisional games in a span of 5 weeks. That's hard. Then you got to come back home and play the Dallas freaking Cowboys. Not an easy game. Followed by then going on the road to New Orleans and to Denver, 2 of the teams with the greatest home field advantage. That is not an easy schedule in your first 11 weeks, especially when you have all these things that could be issues. Then you go on bye, come home, and you have to go against the Chargers team, who I think is still a pretty solid team and could match up pretty well. Go on the road to Minnesota against the Sam Darnold Vikings. I think that's a game you could win. But then having to go to Las Vegas, I think that's a game where they could struggle. If Antonio Pierce is still there and that defense is playing hard, I think that's a team that could be a hard game for him. Coming home against the Giants, on paper, should be a pretty easy game. going to Washington on paper should be a very easy game. But Week 18 against Carolina, I think that's a game Carolina could win to win the division. Yup, you heard it here first. I know people are going to call me crazy. I think Carolina's going to win the NFC South. I'll have a video talking about that later. But look, I think this schedule is actually really hard, and people are not giving them are not really realizing that. Because look, I think absolute best case scenario, you probably get 3 or 4 wins in the division. You get Minnesota, Washington, the Giants, and the Raiders. I think that puts you at 7. If you beat Seattle, that puts you around 8 wins. Their line's at 9.5. But as I have it listed here, you got 3 wins in the first half against New Orleans, Tampa, and Seattle at home. You got Washington, the Giants, Minnesota in the second half of the season. And then hopefully you get that 50-50 against, Vegas. Maybe you get the one against Carolina. Best case scenario, I think that puts you at 8 wins. So for a team with a win projection at 9.5, way too high. A team that is minus 140 win the NFC South, I think that's way too high. So I don't believe in this team. I don't get the hype. I mean, I get the hype, but I don't get the hype. So I have a lot of confidence that this team is going to underperform, is going to let people down. They have so many things that are glaring red flags that aren't being spoken on, and I think that's only going to go and hurt them in the long run. So briefly recapping everything. First of all, like as I said, their offseason just wasn't smart. I think they've consistently made wrong decisions for multiple years now in the Terry Fontenot regime. Pair that with coaching that could be kind of suspect, some overrated playmakers, and maybe an offensive line that is due for some injury regression. I'm scared about what this offense could look like if these things don't pan out the way you're hoping. Pair that with a weak D-line and a difficult schedule. Like, the only thing I think could really go right for this team is honestly the secondary, who has potential if they stay healthy. So, like as I said, I think the hype for the Atlanta Falcons has gone too far. I don't think this team is the best team in the NFC South. Frankly, I think they'll probably have a better chance of finishing as the worst team in the NFC South than they have as finishing the first. I am actually betting on them, I am putting them in my power rankings as the worst team in the NFC South. While Arthur Smith and Ritter cost this team games last year, just because you got Kirk Cousins' new coaching doesn't mean the grass is always greener. So with all that being said, this is why I'm lower on the Falcons. If you stuck around for this entire video, drop a comment. You probably didn't get this far. You probably were pissed off at me and went to the comments 3 minutes in the video and called me an idiot. That's fair, to each their own. But if you did stick around for this long, please go ahead, like and subscribe. And stick around. We got a handful of videos coming out the next couple of days. Power Rankings Tuesday. We got our full season prediction on Wednesday. And then we'll have weekly content, obviously, throughout the entire NFL season. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time as I unveil another team in the Power Rankings before I release the entire Power Rankings.